Hello, everyone. This is Dawisson Lopes. It's my pleasure to host this first event of a series of 6 panels on specific regions of the world. We have gotten together today to discuss the ancestral continent, Africa, and its multiple challenges and also potentials. And for this purpose, we have managed to put together a very special, I would even say stellar lineup, a very special panel to help me and Professor Saliba with this mission. So we have today for this occasion, Ambassador Irene Gala. She is the former ambassador of Brazil to Ghana. She's been Brazil's ambassador to Ghana from 2011 until 2017. And as she served in Africa for 6 years in a row, she's accumulated a lot of knowledge about the country. So she is one of Brazil's top Africanists, I can tell you in all honesty. Then there is Felix Caputo. Felix is a globetrotter, a citizen of the world. He, as a scholar, has been to many different places. He has taken his graduate studies in Belgium. And now he is a Writers at Risk fellow at Fordham University in New York City in the United States of America. But he's also spent some time in Brazil as a visiting scholar at UFMG. So Felix, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Then Professor Amine Ait-Chaalal. He is originally from Algeria. Although he was born in Rome, he just emphasized this a couple of minutes ago, but he is a friend of Brazil, that's for sure. He's been to my country many times at the invitation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And ever since then, he has kept this very close relationship with Brazil, but he's currently based in Belgium, where he's been living for some time now. And he is a professor of international relations at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. And last but not least, my good friend, Ajayi Samson, is joining us today from Lagos in Nigeria. And he's got a lot of experience in business administration. He's currently pursuing his PhD degree in Portugal at the University Institute of Business in Lisbon. And he used to be my fellow colleague from the batch 2017 of Raisina program in India. He is also a Raisina Young Fellow. Nice to see you again, my good friend Samson. So, okay, today we are having one discussion which should work like this. For the first hour, our panelists will have the floor and they will be allowed to speak freely about the challenges Africa is currently facing. So they'll be given like 10 minutes to pose their questions or to make their comments, to share their concerns. I mean, they should conduct themselves the way they feel like for 10 minutes. And then in the second moment, we are having a Q&A session conducted by Professor Aziz Saliba and I, where we will be having a true conversation in a more dynamic way, and also receiving questions from the audience and asking these questions to our honorable guests. So we should start with no further delay, and I will invite Your Excellency Irene Gala. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for this invitation, and it's great to be here. It's great to be with my colleagues from Africa. I'm here in Brazil, but I'm always very close to Africa. When I left Ghana, after Dawisson, he mentioned that I worked 6 years in Africa. As a matter of fact, I have almost 30 years of Africa, but that's okay. He decided to cut a bit of it. But I always say that when I left Ghana, I said, well, I'm going to leave Ghana, I'm going to leave Africa. But then I came to Brazil and I decided Africa didn't need me. So I thought that it was a good idea to return to Africa. And so it's good to be here in this exchange with you. And of course, I should start by congratulating UFMG, Professor Dawisson and Professor Aziz for this fantastic collection that they are bringing to us, but particularly this book on Africa. Maybe my colleagues who are in Africa are not so much aware of the fact that here in Brazil, we tend to look to Africa at a second or a third time when we have the priorities. First, it will be South America, and then we come to Africa. So it's good to see that just by chance, the #1 book of this collection is Africa. So it's really good to see Africa covered in this huge challenge that is to face global challenges. So congratulations to you for this. It's really a very timely book and a collection, but I'm now talking about this, the one on Africa, because this time, after the 21st century, starting as the century for Africa, now we see after more than 20 years, for the first time, Africa with negative numbers in terms of GDP growth. So we have to look at this and see how this is going, what's going to happen, because everybody was very positive about the future for Africa, but then there was this hiccup, and I understand it's going to be a hiccup. And then Africa is going to return to its traditional numbers, because it's very close to the dynamic area of the world that's Asia. So for many other reasons that we are going to have the opportunity to discuss here, but I think that Africa is going, of course, as everybody else, has suffered this moment of the pandemic, but it's going to recover soon. So this moment for this discussion and for this book is very timely. Still about the book, I would like to mention 2 or 3 points. First of all, I like the introduction when you state, as when I say you, I say the organizers, when you state that it has to cover contemporary issues. Here in Brazil, we normally look at Africa, we look at the past, we look at the history, and we don't look at Africa, how contemporary it is, what the challenges are for the moment. So I really like this idea. I also like the idea that you are looking ahead, what the future brings to the continent, what are the challenges. Another point that I consider to be extremely positive, maybe for my colleagues who are the other panelists, you don't take this so seriously, but it's very dear to my heart. The fact that 6 of the authors of the articles brought in the book are foreigners. This is really good, because we have to connect more to Africans. We can't be talking about Africa without listening to Africans. So, and last but not least, I love the idea that you, Dawisson and Aziz, you take Africa as a continent. You don't split it into 2. Normally here in Brazil, people talk about sub-Saharan Africa, but Africa is one. Africa is not a part of, we have to go against this traditional reading of Africa. So really kudos to you guys, because you did a fantastic job. In terms of the challenges for Africa as a whole, I'm sure my colleagues will talk more about that, but of course challenges are in terms of development that's top for Africa, and both in the economic and the social aspects. And of course, I will highlight points that are closer to Brazil. Wealth distribution. This is something, although we talk about Africa as being poor, we know that there is a lot of wealth concentrated in some hands, and we have to distribute this in a better way. Of course, when you talk about development, we have to look at this, how development is going to be done. So leapfrog is a key word, and of course, low carbon economy. All these are challenges. I'm just hinting points that maybe even us, they have to understand, to take the pulse of what Africa is now discussing. Of course, we have employment education with a very young.
Ambassador,
okay, sorry?
No, now I hear you.
Okay, so we have to see how to educate this young population, to train it with the capacities to face a new economy. And of course, we have to talk about governance. Maybe this is one point that I would highlight in your introduction, when you don't mention something that is top. That is the Moi-Brahim Index of Governance. Moi-Brahim, it's a very strong foundation. And I think when they deal with governance, they are showing us what we have to look at when we look at Africa. We have to look at a complex scenario with economic development, rule of law, economic possibilities for development. It's a set of elements that we don't look at only democracy. The Western world likes to, or used to, nowadays not so much, but used to look at Africa and say, well, let's see what we have in terms of democracy. No, we have to look at how governance is. But of course, my main points, and I see that I still have some minutes here, it's the challenge from a Brazilian perspective. We have to look at the challenges ahead for Africa, but from a Brazilian perspective. And I'm glad to be here with Africans, because I always have the impression that Africans, they don't look at Brazil the way as we look at Africa. I normally don't see studies about Africa-Brazil relations. I see relations about Brazil-Africa. I want to see more Africans talking about relations with Brazil from an African perspective. But I will do my job, that is to look at it from a Brazilian perspective. So, number one challenge is to engage more and more with Africa. If Africa is going to be really, if this is going to be the African century, Brazil has to know this and has to engage with Africans. So this collection is really one top point in this engagement, but we have really to go further. The agents, the actors that have to engage with Africa are from the whole scope of our society, in the economic, public, and civil society. All of us, we have something to exchange with Africa. And we look at Brazil and we see that we don't engage with Africa as much as we should. I tend to see this as part of the Brazilian prejudice. We have an internal prejudice regarding Black people in Brazil due to our history and the way we created our, well, the way we see the problem in Brazil. And I have done some studies and I have shown that the same way we have an internal prejudice, we transport this to relations with Africa. It would be quite inconceivable, the idea that somebody who is doing business in Brazil or who is a politician in Brazil, when he or she moves into Africa, and I normally, when I talk about Africa to Brazilians, I always say, face the challenge to recognize that we have a prejudice against Blacks and against Africa. Well, finally, very quickly, we have to look at the potential benefits that we can have both Brazil and Africa working together. And look, when I'm talking here, I'm mainly trying to envisage what the students are going to look at in terms of what they have to study, how they can develop their understanding of Africa to do better things. And so I look at the potential benefits of working together in terms like environment. This is top. When we were seeing, for instance, fires in Brazil last year, we would look at Congo, DRC, and the situation was somehow similar. If we look at still DRC, well, there is this very famous quote that if Africa is a gun, DRC is the trigger of the gun. And I love the idea of DRC being a huge partner of Brazil. We have forest, we have river, we have minerals, so much to do together in terms of environmental and mitigation, in terms of regulation, international regulation of these systems, water, forest, mining, all this together. And of course, if we look at human development, we have to remember that Africa is here in Brazil. We have big challenges in terms of social and human development. So we have what to do together in Africa, with Africa, in the economic multilateral scene and social development. So I think that more or less I've covered a bit of my idea that we have good material here, and more than the material itself, we have a tendency that Brazilians are looking at Africa. And after 30 years, or as a matter of fact, 35 years working with Africa, I'm very glad to see that a lot has changed in terms of Brazil and as well in terms of Africa. So I'm sure that we can do some multilateral consultation to work together in terms of diplomatic efforts and do better things in this 21st century. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irene, Gala.
Thank
and
you.
Speaking of DRC, now we have Felix Caputo. You have the floor.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Good morning to those who are following us and watching us. I'm so happy to be on this panel, and would like to thank Dawisson and Aziz for the idea of bringing me on board of this panel, and also for the good time we spent together at UFMG, which is in my heart as part of my life, and hopefully we'll be meeting again soon. I'm happy to see that on this panel, we have the ambassador who spent many years in Africa and brought with her Africa to Brazil. I'm happy to notice that your choice has taken the Maghreb through our colleague who's representing the North, which is the link to Europe and the link to the Middle East. I'm happy that we have Samson from Nigeria, who's representing the point from which we all of us claim the Bantus in Africa, that we're coming from Nok, from Nigeria. And then you've me from DRC, representing the Central Africa and the southern part of Africa. So thank you very much for being with you. And thank you very much for being part of that book, which you published, which is a big success all around the world. So, and hopefully we'll be doing again things together. Now, talking about challenges regarding Africa, I think we need to have in mind that when we have a country that is known, that is counting 15 putsches, 15 coup d'etat, that is Sudan, another country with the same number, Sierra Leone, or 11 putsches in Burundi, or in Ghana, or less in Mali. And in Mali today, we're speaking of a coup within the coup, because less than 9 months ago, there was a putsch there. And today, the last week, again, another. Nigeria, in the past, we're counting 8, Benin 8, and then with less here and there, and then some countries that we're calling stable. So this is the pattern of what may happen in Africa, or again, when we have a president like in Cote d'Ivoire, who's arrested, he spends 10 years in prison, then the International Court notices that he was arrested for nothing and releases him. Or when we have a president like in South Africa, who's pointed at because of using the national money, or when we have a president like in Libya, who it is said was killed by the order of some superpower. So that is the image we need to to know today of what happens in Africa. And that's not all. We have a huge number of internal displaced people because of violence or because of elections that are not well done, that are provoking violence, that are provoking the succession of power of the same family, the friends taking the power, and then whose power is confirmed by the North. If the North says that X and Y stays on power, then they will stay. In Chad recently, the president passes away, the sons take over, and then because France is covering that, that's all right. When it doesn't cover, that will be bad. So, and elsewhere in DRC, proxy wars, even I will say, because of minerals, which many would like to look at or to take. And then we have to understand, and that was the part we gave, the chapter we gave to that book that UFMG published and under the authority of Professor Dawisson, that in fact, the North is in many ways creating Africa. It is giving it a given image, deciding on what it has to be and what it can't be, what it can do and what it can't do, what is good for Africa, what's bad for Africa. It will call its art primitive, but at the same time, the same primitive art is inspiring famous artists from the North, and the politics have to be copied, to copy what's happening in the North and then pass them into the South. The ambassador spoke about development, then they will easily use words like underdevelopment, developing countries, etc. So the concept itself of what Africa is to be and what Africans have to be is decided upon by the North, which will then know what Africa can be and what it can't be. And when even we have countries like Senegal, like Cameroon, like Angola, Djibouti, Mozambique, Gabon, Morocco, or Zambia, where we we didn't know, we don't have any coup d'etat, any putsch so far, but we'll find out that bankruptcy has touched Zambia, for instance, which is a rich country with a lot of minerals, but it is indebted and it can't afford payment, etc. So again, decisions coming from the North deciding on what Africa is to be, where it is to go. Today, when we look at Algeria, every Friday, what happens with millions of people on the road claiming for change, claiming for a better future, but still sticking to the past. So more than 60 years after the independences, we're still going on with a new form of colonization, because despite the wealth that the countries in Africa have, its sons and daughters can't enjoy it. How many of Africans die every day in the desert because they're trying to go to the north, to the Maghreb, and from there go to Italy and Europe, whereas the country is known to be as the richest? How many can't afford education because education is not organized, or when they go to school, the education they get is zero because the leaders send their daughters and sons elsewhere? How many die of hunger every day? How much violence on gender, which is just a duplication of what happens elsewhere? How many are forced? How many brains are supposed to leave? Because when they try to think there, when they try to suggest things, they become public enemies and they have to leave and go elsewhere. So when we look at that, and then we try to think about the challenges of Africa, we come to the conclusion that we can't summarize them in 10 minutes. There's so many. But at the same time, 10 minutes is enough to think about strategies that could work for Africa and that could resolve problems of the future. Look, just to go to Brazil, the country that I bear in my heart. When we have, like in Africa, some leaders just copying what is happening in the United States, because a president there said, you know, COVID-19 is just nothing, it's nothing. So they will just follow that and imitate. When they will just forget about the population and decide on putting on fire the Amazon forest. So we have the same pattern of people of the South who are suffering from the decision of the leaders, and because the leaders want to copy exactly what they are dictated by some leaders of the North. Now, what should we do if we need to have a better future? The ambassador suggested that, and I'm going to reiterate that again and insist on that. We should think about different kind of cooperations, different kind of thoughts, different kind of concepts that will put us together more than the forest that Madam pointed out and the minerals, more than the same people, the same color that we find in Africa and in Brazil.
10 minutes.
I think we have the same challenges to face, and that we can resolve if we decide to work together and to be in the same block for facing the North. So here we are to try that today in this panel. Thank you.
Great to hear you,
Thank you.
Felix.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
So now I invite Professor Ait-Chaalal to have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Hola, bon dia a todos. Dear colleagues, dear viewers, first and foremost, I send you all my best wishes from Belgium, where the weather is rather nice. It's a little bit hot indeed. And it's a great pleasure to be with you. And I'm very pleased that my very distinguished colleague, Professor Dawisson, has mentioned all my links with Brazil and the Brazilian people. I'm very honored to participate to this very distinguished panel on the current global challenges in Africa, organized by my colleagues of UFMG. It's also a highly interesting opportunity to use all those tools of communication and online learning at the benefit of a significant number of participants, because I think on normal time, it would have been more complex to gather all those participants. That being said, we should hope to return to normal time, because those times are very hard times for all of us. I would like, before beginning, to warmly thank my colleague and friend, Professor Dawisson Lopes, and his colleague, Professor Saliba, for organizing with such energy and creativity this scientific online activity, and to congratulate them. It has been done twice before me, but I would like to do it for the third time, for the 6 books collection that was published on global challenges. So congratulations to both of you and to all the teams behind you. In order to follow the guidelines given to me by Professor Dawisson Lopes, because he is the commander-in-chief of this activity, I will focus my brief presentation on the current situation in North Africa or the Maghreb. Madam Ambassador, my colleague, mentioned the two terms, and it's a little bit complex when we deal with North Africa or the Maghreb, because if we speak about the Maghreb, we will include Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, and we'll stop to Libya. And when we speak about North Africa as a whole, we will include Egypt, of course, and it is why in the American terminology you have this MENA concept, that is to say Middle East and North Africa. So I will try to switch from one to another, and so maybe during the question time we could elaborate about that. Obviously, if we take the 4 countries or the 5 countries, obviously the situation of each country is specific. And I will not have the audacity to summarize the political and socio-economic evolution of those countries in the last years of decades. That being said, in 2021, those countries are at a crossroad. Specifically, 10 years, exactly 10 years after the beginning of what was called at that time, I'm not sure I appreciate the label, but I will not discuss about that, but what was called at that time the Arab Spring or the Arab Springs, we can call them also the Arab Revolutions or the Arab Evolution. This process that produced deep impacts all over the Arab countries, not only on North African countries, has begun in Tunisia, so in North Africa, in the Maghreb, in the city of Sidi Bouzid, when on the 19th of December 2010, a young street seller named Mohamed Bouazizi set fire to himself in order to protest against the harassment of local police authorities. The protest that spread all over Tunisia after that dramatic event, I must underline that Mohamed Bouazizi died in the beginning of January 2011, reached a peak on the 14th of January 2011 when Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali, who was president of Tunisia since 1987, fled the country with his family to Saudi Arabia. The next leader to fall down was Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak in March 2011. It was mentioned by my distinguished colleague, the Libyan head of state Muammar Gaddafi was captured and killed in still rather undetermined and obscure condition in October 2011. In Algeria and Morocco, the situation was somewhat different. There were impacts, but the situation was somewhat different. The ruling leaders of both countries were able to deal with the situation and with the turmoil by various means, and the turmoil was to a certain extent limited, at least in 2011. That being said, in Algeria, in April 2019, President Abdelaziz Bouteflika who was planning to be re-elected for the 5th time, was forced to resign by huge popular demonstration. And Algeria entered since then in a process of political transition and maybe turmoil. After briefly setting the general landscape, what are today the main challenges of the countries in the Maghreb in North Africa? I switch with both terms. There are numerous challenges, and I would like to mention and to highlight some of them, just some of them. 1, the population of working age is increasing at a high rate, and the job market is unable to absorb the new waves of young job seekers. 2, the poverty rate is still at a high level, and either in the cities or in rural areas, so all over the country. And it concerns all the countries involved. 3, Young people, not only them, but young people acquire increasingly high skills and university degrees, but for many of them, the employment market is not adequate. Consequently, the level of unemployment remains high, which creates frustrations and protests, and the development and the continuing development of what is called the informal economy or the gray sector. 4. The process of political democratization is slow and disappointing, considering the high hopes and expectation of 2011. The most successful story or the most successful example is Tunisia. The country was able to elect democratically 3 presidents and to write a new democratic constitution. That being said, the political situation, even in Tunisia, remains difficult and unstable. And there is today in Tunisia a state of disillusionment. 5. The economic prospects for all the countries concerned are still worrisome. The effects and the impact of the pandemic, it was the case before the pandemic, but the effects and the impacts of the pandemic have produced very harmful consequences on the economic development of all the countries involved. 6. In the last 15, 40 years, all the initiatives in order to implement a process of regional integration have failed. This failure has a dramatic cost for all the countries involved and their population. Despite the willingness of the populations, the political decision makers, for numerous reasons, were not able or were not willing to implement this much needed process of economic and commercial integration. 7. In each country, the socio-economic development is not adequate, with high discrepancies between some favorized regions and some marginalized regions, which means rather significant level of social and economic development that needs to be improved in the future, and it's not the case 60 years or 50 years after the independence. 8, the growing private sector is not acting globally in a perspective that is beneficial to the well-being of the majority of the population. 9, the respect of human rights remains a substantial matter of concern, and it's an understatement. 10, the phenomenon of illegal migration is a dark and startling testimony of the high level of disappointment and desperation of the young people about their future in their own country, because they are ready to risk their lives for a totally uncertain future and sometimes for a very bad ending. 11, people of all ages and all backgrounds still have huge difficulty to feel legitimately represented by the political leader, and there is a strong defiance towards the regimes in place. I will stop the list there, just not to reach number 13, in fact. I will stop the list there, and I think the list is sufficiently gloomy not to add more elements. So this list could continue for a long time. But there is hope, because you will think that it's a very gloomy description of the situation. There is hope. Civil society, associations, NGOs, journalists, human rights activists are fighting, but they are fighting peacefully. I said fighting, but they are fighting peacefully in order to change the system and the society. 10 years after the beginning of the Arab evolution or revolutions, the aspirations for freedom, dignity, political participation, respect, empowerment are stronger than ever. Those aspirations have not disappeared. Many initiatives have emerged, some have failed, others have succeeded. Beyond that, and to take a wider focus, the world has changed. The political regimes are obliged to take into account the aspirations, or at least some of the aspirations of their populations. The old methods are not accepted anymore. New ways of action and political mobilization have appeared. Consequently, the assessment of the situation is mixed. The high hopes of 10 years ago were not able to be translated in concrete results in many areas. The winds of change have faded away and disappeared in many cases, but fortunately, it is not the same landscape than 10 years ago. Furthermore, international partners are expressing, loudly or more discreetly, their disapproval about the willingness of the regime to use violent means against the legitimate aspiration of their population. The new generations, more and more connected to the world, are not willing to accept a future that does not correspond to their wishes, hopes, and aspirations. It is why we are probably at a crossroad. The old world has not totally disappeared. The new world is still in the making. It's the last page. But the countries of North Africa, of the Maghreb, will continue on a different path, with probably slow progresses in many areas, but with a strong impulse in order to change the old rules, the old method, the old structures. The process will take time, and since 2011, in 10 years, already, day after day, a certain number of significant improvements have been made. Consequently, the future is open, and the new generation will not allow their future to be stolen and confiscated. The peaceful struggle for democracy, dignity, respect is still going on. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and muito obrigado a todos.
Great speech. Thank you very much. And I mean, from my perspective, the nice thing is that every speaker so far has not only provided us with very fine reflections about Africa, but also has left us with some program or some proposals to think about. This is really nice. And I'll invite my dear friend, Samson, to give his contribution to this talk.
Okay, thank you very much, Dawisson, and really a great opportunity as well as an honor to be here today with the former ambassador of Brazil to Ghana, Ambassador Irene, Professor Amine, Mr. Felix, Professor Dawisson, and Professor Aziz. Great honor to be here. And yeah, discussing the Africa topic, it's a welcome development. I mean, we recently celebrated the Africa Day in the last days, so you know it's a cause for reflection and to evaluate where we are going to. Have we been able to achieve the expectations? And I would say Professor Amin did a very good job by trying to recount some of the challenges that we already experience in Africa. And I'll be touching more or less on one or 2 points that the previous speakers have already mentioned, most likely from a different perspective, and also creating a different base. So the expectations from an African point of view, I would say, it's quite high. A lot of people, imagine Africa to be the next frontier. With the development of the BRICS countries, there was a new focus in Africa. And I would say I am actually an Africa Comps fellow. So when I started my career early, I was part of a program that's, a capacity development program where German companies come to Africa, identify future potentials, take them to Germany, train them, upskill them, in the German way, then send them back as ambassadors to Africa to implement those changes. So, I would say that a lot of countries, expected so much from Africa. I wouldn't say that those expectations are already cut short. I would say we are more or less in the direction to achieving them. Africa is endowed with so many resources, human capital resources, the youngest continent in the entire world, and, a lot of things I believe that we can do much more than we are doing. We can also give credit. The Africa that as we know it today has evolved over time. There used to be a lot of war, a lot of coup d'etat, a lot of different upheavals that really prevent the development of the continent. But if you look at it in recent time from an hindsight point of view, realize that quite a number of the African countries are actually evolving. A lot of them are now part of the fastest growing economies in the world. If we look at the development that is taking place in Rwanda, look at Kenya, South Africa is also steadily evolving. The population of the continent already is a strong base and shows the potential from an economic point of view. So I would say these are more or less good optics, but if we look at it in recent times, yeah, I'm sure a lot of Africans will not really be very proud about the recent developments. We believe that we should have evolved past that stage where, the level of insecurity, coup d'etat, assassination has taken place. Speaking from an own point of view, the situation is also quite there. From an insecurity point of view, the amount of insecurity in Nigeria is quite high, and I'm very sure a lot of African countries can also resonate to this. If we look at Southern Sudan, if we look at Ethiopia, just to mention but a few. But having said all this, I believe that when we talk about the challenges of Africa, there is no how we cannot make reference to the global challenges. Because if we look at it critically, most of the global challenges that we have, I would say 80% of them are challenges that are more or less more peculiar to different African countries. When we talk about hunger, when we talk about poverty, less than a significant percentage of our population live on a daily basis less than $1 per day. So while we are the youngest, we also have the other side where we are more or less the poorest continent in the world. And this shouldn't be, considering the amount of resources that we sit on. So looking at it from the point of view of the challenges, aside from the hunger and poverty, I also believe that another major challenge that we face in the continent is with reference to corruption. So corruption is more or less systemic and institutional, and this really prevents the required changes in different African countries. We know this is a global issue. A lot of countries, even developed countries, also have high level of corruption. But considering the peculiarities of Africa, I would say that we have more incidents of corruption here than in other countries, because it is more or less the most people that have the opportunity to find themselves in political positions or leadership role have the mentality of survival of the fittest, and the smartest. I just want to, amass as much wealth as I can. It's an opportunity of the lifetime, without even considering what the long-term plan is for the country as a whole. So having this at the back of our mind, I would say this is one of the major challenges that we are facing, and it's making us, digress and not progress in a long way. And I'm sure that so many African countries, have one or two challenges that they are facing in this regard. When we also look at it from, a more global point of view, the global change is the climate change is affecting Africa, not only European countries. While we are the least country that contributes to this pollution from a world point of view, we are more or less the recipient of the most. We are the most recipient, because a lot of things is not only about livestock or even farming, importation, because we don't have the end-to-end processing. We definitely depend a lot with reference to importing things from other countries. So things that are not really meeting the required standard from development countries' point of view, these are things that are heavily imported into the country, causing a lot of air pollution, having so much hazard in terms of our health, just to mention but a few. I haven't highlighted some of these challenges without recounting what other speakers have said. I feel that one of the areas that I would say something to look out for, that we can also be optimistic about, would be the recently initiated Africa Continental Free Trade free trade area. So yeah, it has been a bit of a challenge in the past years to do business in Africa. You know, as big as Africa is, it is very, very challenging to easily migrate or easily move from one region to the other. You know, all the advantages that is available in Europe or, you know, in the Americas, it is very, very challenging for me to even move to East Africa. You have to go through embassy, go through checkpoints and the likes, let alone doing business. It's really, really challenging. But the good thing is that I strongly believe that one of the best things that can ever happen to Africa is, you know, this intercontinental free trade area. This is going to be the largest trading area in the world, and it is going to amass a lot of opportunities for different African countries. Yes, we have seen a lot of buy-in from different countries. The implementation is also critical, you know, and of course, this is going to lead to a lot of structural adjustments, infrastructural development. The country that is able to optimize the potential in this agreement is going to be the one that is going to, you know, strictly invest in infrastructural development, and it is also going to bring a lot of competition to different consumers, because of course trades would be advantaged here. And going to one of the points that was mentioned previously by Professor Amine, we see a lot of brain drain in Africa. A lot of people want to migrate because the opportunities are not there. Yes, we mentioned that we have the highest amount of youth population, but yeah, if the opportunities are not there for the youth to thrive, definitely they have to look elsewhere. Yes, a lot of people are qualified, and the mindset of getting more qualification is also coming down to a lot of competitions that are there. So when the environment is not enabling for people to be able to use their potential to implement the required change, yes, they would have to look for other alternatives. So while we are losing a lot to Europe and to the America, I mean, with the introduction of this free trade agreements, we would be able to see the possibilities of African migrating to other African countries and be able to either do trade or even get gainful employment and, you know, enable good living for themselves. So having said that, I would like to stop at this point to be able to continue with the discussions. Thank you very much, and back to you, Professor Dawisson.
Thank you very much, Samson. And now I invite my dear colleague and co-author, co-editor of our book series, Professor Saliba. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor Dawisson Lopes. We have been working together for quite some time, over a decade now, and it has always been a pleasure to me to work with you. And this collection is perhaps one of the greatest fruits of our cooperation over this decade. It's a pleasure to have with us such a distinguished panel this morning, if you are here in Brazil. And I would like to thank Ambassador Gala, Professor Amine Ait-Chaalal, Felix Caputo, and Samson Ajayi for joining us in this very interesting discussion in which many different points of view, many views from Africa were presented. So I do have a couple of questions for each of you. I will follow the same order of presentations, if I may. So I'll begin with Ambassador Irene Gala. Ambassador, you are one of the most experienced diplomats in Brazil with regards to Africa, one of the most knowledgeable diplomats in Brazil with regards to Africa. I know that Brazil's relation with Africa has had its ups and downs. How do you evaluate the last perhaps 10, 20 years in our relation with Africa. How much has it changed in the last decade or 2 decades? And also, how do you evaluate Africa's relation with China over the same period? How much has it changed in the last decade or the last 2 decades?
Well, thank you for the question. And just to inform my colleagues, I don't have much competition here in Brazil in terms of diplomats working with Africa. So it's not difficult to be mentioned as one of the top. Thank you anyway. Well, let me start by the end about Africa and China. I think my colleagues can better mention and evaluate a relation with China. Again, from a Brazilian perspective, I like to say that we in Brazil, we have to stop putting some kind of blames on Africa-China relations. I normally say to people here in Brazil that China is not making too much of a difference concerning other Western countries. Our colleague Felix, he mentioned neocolonialism. So if we have China and we have the US or we have Europe, at least I understand that Africans, they have a choice. They can negotiate what is the better deal for them. So I don't, I think that this dialogue or this narrative talking about how bad China can be for Africa, it's very much something that we are copying in Brazil, because Africa is receiving China the same way Brazil is receiving China. So I think it's a new partner, it's a new global actor, and Africa will be able to handle it. And as always, it's going to see what is, at least there is a choice for African partners. So I see it as very positive with all the challenges, but I think I see it as something positive for Africa. In terms of Brazil, the last 20 years has been very rich in terms of ups and downs. We were up with President Lula, but we were up when Africa was very much up. I normally say that Brazil reached Africa at the beginning of the 21st century, not because of Lula, but the government of Lula followed Brazilian groups, financial groups and private groups who are already doing business in Africa. So politicians followed economics. So that was something top, but then we had a big fall with the Lava Jato, our operation. It was really a pity because we, as we say in English, we had to throw the baby with the water. And Brazil had a very strong position with construction groups, and they simply had to drop the Brazilian flag. They are still in Africa, but now under another, with another name, or with financing from other countries like Spain or the UK. So it's a pity that we lost this strong foot that we had put on Africa. But on the other hand, I think that despite of that, we did a lot of exchange in terms of people. And I trust that relations is done by, or are done by people. And particularly CPLP, the relation that comes from the end of the 20th century, has done a lot of bringing people together. So for this short period of time, we have CPLP, we have now the understanding that we have a community. And I think this is very positive. But now, unfortunately, with all the challenges that we are facing in Brazil, it's not the best time for Brazil-Africa relations. But we see from another perspective that a collection like yours gives us the hope that we have more students going into this. So I see it as positive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My next question goes to our former colleague at UFMG, Professor Felix Caputo, and I would like to say that it's a pleasure to see you. We miss you here. We hope to have you here again in the near future. But I will sort of use part of the question that I put to Ambassador Gala. and apply to some things that you said during your presentation. I would like to know the role that you see for great powers in Africa. By great powers, I mean the permanent five, right? US, UK, France, China. I put to Ambassador Gala. What do you think that the greatest powers, they bring, in which ways, I would say, they bring stability, in which ways they foster instability in Africa?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And thank you so much for reminding our time at UFMG. And I hope indeed to be there again with you. The role of the great powers concerning what is happening in Africa has to do with the fact that many, we could say, have not accepted that the child can grow and take his own decision and live by himself or by herself. So the greatest powers of the world still consider Africa as their over continent territories in many ways. So that is that Africa can't do with them, can't decide but itself. And that is challenging to the point that we see them competing in Africa. The ambassador spoke about the Chinese, Europe, and the United States. It is still as if we're going often back to 1875, the Berlin conference for dividing Africa to different countries. So it is as if, yes.
Professor Caputo, I apologize for interrupting, but I also would like to, I forgot to mention the other P5, Russia, and I am also very interested in hearing about Russia's role in Africa as well, in addition to the other members, permanent members of the Security Council.
Yeah, it is going in the same way. That is, it is as if each of them would like still to have part of influence in Africa. The Cold War has stopped, but it is as if there's another kind of Cold War continuing in Africa, because each of these different superpowers would like to have its own influence, its own part in Africa. And that is making it challenging, and even it's going to challenge the continental trade, as Samson pointing out, because we have different influences coming from these powers that would like Africa to respond to given patterns coming from them. And Russia today, which is quite present in these days in Central Africa, yeah, would like also to take its share of Africa, and then many of them still look at it as the country that has to provide with minerals, so without so much consideration for the past. And then there is a big mistake in the part of some African leaders, because China can give money without looking at the conditions, without looking at where it is going. So China is welcome, and the old partners are somehow pushed aside, and that is creating another competition among these partners. We have, for instance, Turkey, that was absent from Africa, but today is getting present here and there, because again, it's a matter of being present, of personal interest. If they could, for instance, the European Union have the same policies over Africa, and then having a given agreement between the European Union and the United States and China, thinking in the same way, about what are the priorities of Africa, I think things would be better. But because they're going there, following different paths, different protocols with the leaders, so the results are not so good. And because of that, we can say that instead of helping, in many ways, they may happen to be creating conflict because of what they may be willingly giving to Africa, but because there's so many others coming with the same purpose, so the differences are leading to challenges, and the result are not going to be as positive as that. And Russia today comes there as the one who is somehow speaking another language, looking differently, and using again the same African leaders. So we're there with Africa, which may be serving as the place where different guns coming from different countries, made in different countries, may be tried there, etc. And the goodwill of the good government of the superpowers may be lost in that, because there is no cohesion, no coherent understanding among them.
Thank you very much, Professor Caputo. And again, it's a pleasure to see you.
Thank you.
Now, my next question goes to Professor Amine Ait-Chaalal. So, first of all, thank you for the presentation. And you mentioned the Arab Spring, and social media played an important role in fostering the protests. So what role does social media play today in North African politics? Can you tell us about the so-called electronic flies?
I think this is a complex matter because during the Arab Spring, or the Arab Springs in plural, there was a sort of theory that those events were to a certain extent allowed and impulsed by the social media. I would say that the French Revolution, the American Revolution, or the Russian Revolution took place without social media. So we don't need social media to make a revolution in this regard. The fact that social media have played a role is undoubtedly real, but it's really an assessment. I will not say that it's shared by everyone, but the fact to say that social media was at the origin of those events, I think is overestimating the level of frustration that was under the sea, I would say, and that has the necessity to express in many quarters of Arab societies. Social media were a tool, where it was a tool, it was a useful tool, but not much more than a tool. That being said, it should not be also underestimated, because it has created a sense of ownership of the movement, and it has created a certain number of dynamics that has created the process. So I would be rather careful about that, and specifically for the beginning of the events in Tunisia, in Egypt, and other countries. That being said, you are asking me what's going on today, and what is going on today. Today, they are still playing a role, but social media are part of our everyday life. And so the role of social media is the same like in every country. Let's take an example. Here in Europe, due to the pandemic and due to many reasons, you have some protests about some decisions made by the authorities, and some of those protests are generated by social media. But the protests are here, they are present. Social media are just a matter to express them. So I will be, and I may be not very mainstream about that, I will be a little bit careful about overestimating the role of social media. Social media seems to me as a part of the process, but it's not the process. It's a channel, it's an element, and it has proven to be efficient, or at least it has proven to produce a certain number of effects. But when some people speak about the Arab Springs and the outcomes of the Arab Springs as the proof of that we have entered a new era of social media, and social media are shaping our lives. Yes, they are part of our lives, but as I told you, revolutions took place in the past, from Russia to France to the United States, without social media. And political mobilization, the civil rights movements in the US was not implying any kind of social media. Martin Luther King Jr. does not have social media at his disposal, and he was able to make what he made. So I will be rather careful about the assessment of the role of social media. I know that I have some colleagues not in political science, in fact, maybe some colleagues more about communication or media analysts, who tend to underline the role of social media. On my side, I will be rather careful. I do not wish to minimize the role of social media, but I would like to be rather careful about that. Social media are part of our life. It is a tool. It was a tool used like satellite channel, like Al Jazeera, for example. But it's the evolution of society. The tools that were at disposal of the French revolutionaries, or the American revolutionaries, or the Russian revolutionaries, were the tools of their time. And each time of history has its devices at its disposal. So I will remain maybe a little bit careful about social media, not overestimating them, but not underestimating them. I'm rather careful, and I'm so careful that I never wrote about them. To be very frank about you, I never wrote anything about them, because I'm still wondering exactly how we could really assess their value and their coefficient and in the equation. I'm a little bit careful about that. Maybe because I'm a son of a diplomat, but it's another story about that. So this is an answer. I'm not sure it's a satisfactory answer, but this is the best answer I can provide you.
Well, thank you very much. And finally, last but not least, I have a question for Samson Ajayi. I'll try to combine, Samson, the questions posed by the audience to you, as I believe they strongly relate to your very thoughtful presentation. Africa has many regional organizations, the African Union, East African Community, Southern Africa Development Community, Economic Community of Central African States, Economic Community of West African States, to name just a few. What role do you believe these organizations have played, and what prospects you see for them in economic, environmental, political, social, and security issues in the near future?
Yeah, thank you very much.
And also thank you for taking part in this panel with a very, very thoughtful presentation.
Thank you, Professor Aziz. Well, with reference to the question, the role of regional organization and, what I would say in the long term, what roles they play in the continuous sustainability of the continent? Well, I think the role of the regional organizations and multilateral organizations present in Africa, we can't overestimate them. From an advisory point of view to concerted efforts towards development, provision of funding for promotion of startups and the like. So I think the roles of this regional organization is quite important. For a fact, I know they have initiated several projects that have direct impacts in the alleviation of poverty in different African countries. I know for sure also that they are consistently trying to establish standards so that there is some level of normalcy and standardization across different African countries. I know also that, of course, it's not just about the economics. They are also promoting regional stability, so that there is free movement of people and products or goods across the continent. So indeed, these regional organizations are here to stay. I don't expect any of them, either the AU or wherever, or the Organization of African Unity, to go out of the equation anytime soon, because I believe that at critical points like this, we need the best of Africa to come together and unite the continent as a whole. Looking at the Organization of African Unity, for example, led by Professor Additional, I know that from an agricultural point of view, they are also trying to, infuse a lot of mindset change, to how agriculture is being perceived. It's not just about, agriculture is now being left for the poor. Agriculture is now seen as one of the major ways that we can diversify the economy. So, for example, countries like Nigeria that totally depend on oil, we were hit the most during the impact of COVID. And for economies like this, it is your state of development is very, very frail, because there have been a lot of volatility when it comes to commodity prices and the likes, not just oil but minerals and the like. So if your economy is not diversified, if the government is not well positioned to look at things from a different perspective, if you do not make any effort to develop the informal market, the small and medium scale enterprise, all these initiatives or key parameters are being promoted by each or different organizations like this in the African continent. So for me, I think it is very, very important, the role that they are playing, and I would not expect that in the short or in the long term they are out of the continent. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you for your answer. Now back to my friend, Professor Dawisson Lopes.
And it's been such a great experience so far. I was delighted to hear each one of you. And this is a very disciplined group. We have been together for 1 hour and a half, which leaves me some time to pose another round of questions. And I have some questions indeed. And now I'll be standing on the shoulders of both Kelly Meira and Juliano Cortinhas. They have sent questions through the chat box on YouTube, and I'll try to elaborate and draw on their questions, because as Ambassador Gala, she has cleverly noted, we have taken the decision to treat Africa as a continent in our book series. But as we convened you and as we invited you to be here together, we have taken another approach. And as Felix has again smartly noted, we have divided the continent into subregions, blocks, so as to have from you local views and to try to understand the peculiarities of each Africa, so to speak. And I have been trying to work on this topic. I mean, this trade-off, this struggle continuous struggle between regional forces and Pan-African forces. And it's always hard to find out what the outcome is in advance. So we never know when regional forces will prevail or the, say, Pan-African ones. And now I invite you to give us some views from Africa or about Africa. How do you find regional integration to be a key for the solution of many African problems? Is it really the way, the only way, one way to cope with African issues or not? Because as I was becoming familiar with African topics, African challenges, I could also learn from my readings that there are many, say, sovereigntist approaches in Africa. So there are many countries which are not willing to let it go. I mean, the sovereignty go, given all the historical traumas and the internal political dynamics. So it's hard for some people, for some leaders, for some societies to entertain the idea of an African unity. So at this specific crossroads, how do you see the prospects of African unity? And is regional integration the best way to cope with African challenges right now? So this is my first question. And I'll leave you with another one as we have some time remaining. And my second question relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. And see where I sit now. I'm in Brazil. Definitely now the epicenter, along with India, I mean, South Asia and South America are probably some of the most defined places on earth to be at the moment with regards to the current pandemic. And we are really concerned with the future of this pandemic and how it might affect Africa in the years to come. When I look around, I see that in some parts of the world, namely East Asia, Oceania, the US, the UK, people are already living what one could call a post-pandemic life, while in South Asia, South America, and maybe in Africa, we are still stuck. We are still struggling and managing to survive this pandemic. My main concern, there's a gap in terms of inequality, which is widening. And I don't know if it keeps spiraling out, I don't know where this is going to lead us, this widening gap between the post-pandemic world and the part of the world, or the parts of the world where we're still struggling with the pandemic. So how do you see the future now, specifically relating to the pandemic and the effects that it has brought along? It's now with you, my friend, and I should invite Ambassador Gala to begin.
Okay, thank you. It's not easy for me to comment on regional integration for African Pan-Africanism, but let me put it that way. For us, for Brazilians, it's a good idea that we can talk to less than 54 countries. It's good for us to talk to regional groups. And I see a lot of commonalities in these groups. So their challenges are not, do not divide them. The challenges really bring them together. So I see regional integration in Africa as something quite normal, natural. And the many platforms that were created, the many, those many groups, because they have political, they have economic, you see, they work together with some kind of reasoning. So it makes them very functional. And I think it's good for Brazil because we can discuss with one, but reaching many. So I like the idea of the regional integration. And I think it's working, for instance, in terms of peace and security. You see a lot of work done by regional groups, how they try to work either in prevention or after, in terms of settling down differences. I think it works. And it makes a lot of sense when we understand that borders in Africa were very much artificial. So the regional integration somehow may respond to this kind of illusion, the borders. In terms of the Pan-Africanism, I think for Brazil, this is something that makes us really believe it works, because in one of the main topics for the Brazilian diplomatic agenda, that was the reform of the Security Council, Africa could always stick together. They never divided. They were always together. So we see that this Pan-African idea, this integration works. So when they have their own, when Africans, when they have something to fight for in the Security Council, is just one example, it really works. So I see it as something that has come to stay, and it works well. But again, I'm not the one to comment on that. I see it from our perspective as something good that makes things easy for us. There is one subject, for instance, that I did not have the time to touch, that was security. That's a big challenge for Africa in terms of organized crime, drugs, and it's also something that brings Brazil very close. And so if we look at the Gulf of Guinea, and we see the challenges they face, we see we have a lot to do. And it's not Guinea-Bissau, it's not, it's the region. So it works. In terms of COVID, I don't have, I think the future, I don't know what's going to be, but what is very amazing for Brazilians is and people are always asking me, why Africa is doing so well? So it's not that Africa is doing so well. Africa is not doing bad because of a lot of many reasons. But I think that I always like to highlight that the experience of Africans with this kind of diseases is quite big. I was in Africa, in West Africa, when they had Ebola. And so all that they have learned lessons that they can apply now. And again, African integration worked in terms of how we will respond as a continent to this virus. So again, I think the two get together because in terms of fighting COVID, Africans work together in the regional integration, and I think the results have been good. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Dr. Caputo.
Yeah, thank you so much for both questions. Starting with the first one, which is about looking at Africa as a bloc and then regional subdivisions, if we can call it in that way. I have to point out the fears. There have been so many fears from the Africans themselves and also from the former colonial powers. Let's start with looking at Africa as one, as unity. Even though we have the African Union since the 60s, but still we have many challenges because it can only decide on given topics, but so many presidents are afraid of losing their sovereignty if they have to stick to the idea of Africa as a whole, as a unity. And because of that, that is making it difficult to have the same idea covering all Africa. And even a bit going a bit in the opposite sense of what Samson pointed out, even though there is much hope for trade if Africa had to be considered as one through the trade of African Union, but still there are countries resisting because they think they will lose a lot. And we see that even in regional constitutions, that many are afraid. And then there are some countries in which you can get without your passport, another way we have to pay fees, etc. So they're not going to have the same rules applied to everybody living in the same sub-region and recognized as part of that association or group of the region. So that's a big challenge. And again, behind that, I'm sorry to point that out again, there is that colonial inheritance, which is still weighing so much on Africans. So it will be easy for some Francophone countries to deal among themselves, for some Anglophone countries to deal with, among themselves, or to get afraid of mixing with some other countries. So this long inheritance from the colonial powers are still working there. And this, we have to add a third level of fears, which are from the same former colonial powers, which are also afraid of losing their influence if everybody has to be speaking about the same language and looking at Africa in the same way. So my suggestion for that, for the regional organization, as well as for Africa, the African Union, would be to move slowly, level after level. Now that the Africans can, the president can meet in the African Union, what's next? What can we try? What can make them convene? What can make them think in the same way? If we can touch upon that, then we can go slowly. And then I think the commercial realization and exchanges in Africa will slowly be coming in, but it's still a way to go. Concerning COVID-19, as the ambassador pointed out, it's so strange that the country that has been predicted that it will have the biggest number of dead people in the world, that is the one that obviously, you have to say, has been doing better. When I look at what happened here in New York last year, the numbers of people were dying. And then when I was calling back in Africa, and then understanding that people were going around and living because they need every day to leave the house, to go out, to look for food, to survive. And yet, these are the ones who are surviving. So this should call upon the scientists to look at what is happening. The ambassador pointed out about the other pandemics that have been there for long, and then because of that, people may be trained. But maybe there are also other alternatives. I've been working in anthropology and know that some of them have been using plants for protecting themselves, for trying to avoid the extension of the pandemic. So still, there are things that we can learn from Africa and that we could apply to the world to face what's happening, and then to make sure the Africans can accept. And there we have today a resistance. Many Africans are refusing to get vaccines. They're saying the West is going to kill them. They know they don't need that. So again, that's another issue which is serious to address in order to convince of how vaccination could solve the problems, but how we could integrate it into local cultural understanding of medicine, of treatment, etc. So there are things that the world need to start learning and to be seriously start learning from Africa, because the entire world has been believing that Africa is the place where you send, where you give. But the COVID-19 is teaching us that it's also the place from where we need to start learning, and we need to start getting in a serious conversation in order to build bridges with the world, and in order to learn from them what can be done and duplicated maybe elsewhere. If the Africans can feel that pride, that they are taken seriously, I think that could be a precedent for making and facing other challenges from what is happening with COVID-19. Thank you.
Very interesting. Professor Ait-Chaalal, I hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your questions. Very interesting questions. I will pretend that I thank you for the first one, and I will pretend to thank you for the second one, but the second one is very difficult to answer. So I will try to my best of my ability, but it's not easy, and I'm very fortunate that Madam Ambassador and Professor Caputo spoke before me, because it's a very, very tricky question. And I know that you like to ask complex and tricky questions. About regional integration, and I will limit myself to the Maghreb. You mentioned something very, very wise. Is it the way? Is it one way? Is it the best way? I don't know. It is probably one way. And it is probably one way, but it has never been tried, unfortunately. And at least we can say that the current situation is a huge failure. Economists speaks about the cost of the non-Maghreb, and they have quantified the fact that the Maghreb, the integrated Maghreb, does not exist. They have quantified the cost for all the countries involved. And the following sentences are very simple, not to say simplistic, but united, the Maghreb countries will be stronger. Divided, the Maghreb countries are weak. They are weak in international negotiations. They are weak when they try to create links between them. So it's very obvious that the fact that regional integration has not taken place in the Maghreb is a huge failure. We can ask ourselves why there was no regional integration and why there is no regional integration nowadays, taking into account the examples of Europe, which is very close to the Maghreb, taking into account South American integration, either Mercosur or UNASUR. Many reasons, different regimes, different goals, territorial disputes, different ambitions, useless rivalries between leaders. So there are many reasons why this goal was not reached. And what is very disappointing and very sad, to say the least, it's that for decades, not years, for decades, since the independence, in fact, because during the wars of independence, the different populations, Moroccans, Algerians, Tunisians, Libyans, were in great solidarity to fight against colonialism. And in their view, when they were students, when they were young, in their view, after independence, the future was a form of regional integration. So it's a great disappointment. It's a great disappointment in the past, in the present, and unfortunately, maybe in the future. The populations were ready, and they are ready because there are many common features between the Maghreb populations in various aspects. I will not elaborate there, but there are many common features. Unfortunately, political decision makers are not ready, are not willing to do it. And I think each country of the Maghreb and each population of each country of the Maghreb is paying a very high price, have paid and is still paying a very high price to the fact that this regional integration has not been done. I don't know if it's too late, but it's late. It's really late, and to be very, let's say, realistic, in the near future, it's difficult to predict that the process will be implemented by the current decision makers. Your second question, this is the difficult question. It is a difficult question because it's way beyond political science. It's way beyond international relations. It's questions of medicine, epidemiology, virology, and I have no qualification in any of those fields. But because I'm usually polite, I answer question I'm asked. So I will answer you. I'm usually polite. So I hope more than usually. I'm polite more than usually. It was mentioned by Professor Caputo. I think one question is the question of the availability of vaccines for African countries. I think that for, let's say, developed countries, industrialized countries, there is a moral duty and there is a sanitary obligation to provide a sufficient number of vaccines for Africa. In this regard, Professor Dawisson, you mentioned the situation in the United States and in Europe, and you qualified it as probably something like as post-pandemic. I think the situation is evolving, but we should be very careful. We should be very careful about speaking about a post-pandemic situation. The specialists here in Europe are still rather careful about the situation. It's true that the situation is progressing, but they tend to let's ask people to remain very careful in their behaviors, because some people tend to have less relaxed behavior and less careful behaviors, and it could be dangerous in the future. About Africa, I think it should be said, and I think a certain number of international leaders are very well aware of that the pandemic will not be solved. And the meaning of the term solved is still to be determined precisely, because we don't know what will be the outcome of this process. But so, the pandemic will not be solved in some parts of the world, of the planet, let's say Europe and North America, if it's not solved in all parts of the planet. And so it's not just a question of solidarity, it's a question of realistic assessment of the situation. If the situation is not solved everywhere, that is to say in Brazil, in India, in Africa, everywhere, the situation will not be safe in Europe, it will not be safe in North America. And it will be a huge illusion to think that we are okay, we are saved, and let's process, let's going on. As I said, it's a moral duty, but it's also a sanitary obligation about that. And the different procedure, COVAX, etc., are implemented, and the WHO is, we can speak about the role of WHO, but it's another matter. The WHO is strong, and other bodies are asking very strongly for the vaccination process to be extended as fast and as efficiently everywhere in the world. Otherwise, this post-pandemic world will be very, very, very difficult to reach, and we will live in a sort of illusion, and this illusion could lead us to more disasters. I don't want to be so gloomy, I don't want to be so pessimistic, but I think that we should be at least realistic about that. And I think that very carefully this matter should be dealt with by the specialists of this matter, and they are speaking out everywhere at the international and at the national level, asking for solidarity with all countries everywhere in the world. So that's it for me.
And great answer, as usual, and polite as well.
Yeah, I try.
So Samson, I'll just give you some background information before you proceed. Nigeria is as big as Brazil when it comes to population now, and more than 200 million people. We're just about the same size, the two countries. And while Brazil has had 500,000 casualties due to COVID-19 so far, Nigeria has had only 2,000 deaths. I mean, it's hardly comparable. 2,000 deaths is more or less Brazil's daily death toll. So since you're joining us from Lagos, what's happening in there? Can you tell us in fuller detail?
Yeah, thank you, Dawisson, for the question. Well, with reference to the COVID, of course, I would not say that Nigeria is any different from any African country, or Africa different from any other, continent. Of course, we've also had our share of past experience. The ambassador mentioned Ebola. There is also Lassa fever that has really, impacted us heavily when it comes to pandemic in the past. In terms of COVID, it's not as though there has been any special measures that have been taken. Of course, a lot of precautionary measures have been really instilled into a lot of people. I would say what gave us a lot of advantage is there was an earlier reaction to it. So immediately it already started in the West. There was a lot of restriction, travel restriction, and other precautionary measures as already mentioned. At the moment, I mean, if I speak about Nigeria, we've already received the first jabs of the COVID vaccine, and it has been administered. I think it's already expiring right now. To tell you how serious it is, some employers actually inform their staffs to either take it or don't come to work, just to give you some orientation. So, of course, I would say less than 1% of the population has been vaccinated, which, you can imagine the amount of people that have not been vaccinated if we compare it to 200 million people. Yes, we are already expecting the second batch. The president already received it. I mean, it is not business as usual if you go out. Some organizations or some areas that you go, if you are not, having the necessary precautionary things like face masks and the like, you will not be allowed to enter. And likewise, you still see a lot of people who walk on the streets, and have normal engagement without having any kind of precaution. But what is clear is that there have been, in fact, newer installments of restrictive measures. So it's not as though the cases have increased, but the government is just taking precautionary measures, learning from what is happening in Turkey and also in India, knowing that we have similar size, and as well Brazil, knowing that we have similar size, and there's also possibilities. They've actually even banned flights coming in from those countries. So yes, the scientists have said maybe the advantage is giving us the age is giving us advantage, the weather is giving us advantage. Yes, it's not proven, but I would say what I know for sure that has given us a lot of edge is, there's a lot of orientation to take it serious, to avoid any form of gathering and the like. So I would say this is more or less what has really helped in a way, and knowing fully well that, as Professor Amine mentioned, a lot of people are living on their daily subsistence. So if, in fact, before the first set of restrictions were lifted, a lot of people were hungry. They were already, having the anxiety to go back to work because there was no way they could live, and other vaccinations methods to enable them continue their living, it's not really extending. And this is the corruption that we are talking about. So people want to go back to work, and they had to take on the precautionary measures as mentioned. So if I look at it in respect to the question that you earlier asked, the future of COVID, I also echo what Professor Amine said. I wouldn't want us to look at it as a post-pandemic already, because it can always resurface, you know. So what I think is paramount is that, of course, we have to have this orientation of sharing. And I think a lot of developed countries are already doing it. And there's also the terminology vaccination inequality, you know, moving around, because if you look at it, less than 1.5% of the entire distribution has come to Africa. You know, if we look at it, it's not a balanced spread. You know, and there's a lot of possibilities that things can actually go out of hand. So what I feel, or I believe, is actually a more sustainable measure is, you know, local empowerment to the development of this vaccine. And it has already started in some countries. Rwanda is already making efforts, and the government is also supporting them. So I think if a lot of African countries, or not just Africa, but other countries have this orientation, it's really going to help, you know, in the development of this. And, you know, we can better prepare in case similar incidences happen in future as we go on. Looking at the first question in terms of regionalism, I would say, yeah, I think it is a step in the right direction. I really cannot do without it. Yes, we don't have the experience, and if you look at it, we have a lot of regional blocks, about 14 regional blocks in Africa. And even with those regional blocks in Africa, you cannot easily move. You know, you cannot easily do things in Africa. So yes, one also questions, you know, the effectiveness of those regional blocks or regional integration. So I strongly believe that having a more regional block like the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is really going to help a lot. Aside from the fact that it is going to support to ensure you know, improvement of trade within Africa countries, it is also going to, you know, improve the competitiveness of whatever trades that we are doing. People will be able to move freely. People will be able to. There's going to be an improvement in intra-Africa expansion, and it's also going to improve the regional integration. So, I mean, we see the entire population of Africa is 1.2 billion. It's a lot of potentials, and, you know, looking at the GDP accumulated, you know, it's a lot. So if we try to improve how we are able to do business collectively, it's really going to help. Just to give you put things in perspective, Kenya, for example, does trade relations more with Europe and United States compared to its neighboring country, Ethiopia. You know, and if we look at it, it doesn't really make any logical sense. You should be able to do trade locally more than internationally. So if we are not able to have this you know, regional hub that enables this free movement of people and goods, then I don't think we'll be able to move forward. Thank you.
It's been so pleasant, the 2 hours that we have spent together, and we are coming to a close now. We're reaching the time limit of 2 hours. So I would just want to invite Professor Saliba. Maybe he wants to give his final words before we close.
Well, I just wanted to thank Professor Dawisson Lopes for the partnership, and the members of this panel for their excellent presentations and their very thoughtful answers. I look forward to cooperating with you soon.
Yeah, it's really been a thrilling conversation, and I could learn lots from you. So I really hope that we can catch up anytime soon, and we can find a place. I mean, be it Lagos, New York City, Brussels, Brazil, we will find a spot to safely get together and exchange more about Africa and the other things that might arise, the other topics. Thank you very much for your time, for your knowledge, and for your willingness to share. And we see each other anytime soon, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much. And la próxima vez no Brasil.
La próxima vez no Brasil.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.